Patently not. And I just wonder, both in terms of Afghanistan and Iraq, whether you, as a avowed neoconservative, want to say to people you're trying to persuade, look, Iraq and Afghanistan have been a success. Do you say that to people?
Well, look, I mean, I don't think there's much doubt that Afghanistan is a lot better than it was. There's a lot to be...
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you spend much time there, but
look,
on this program, we talk to people who are in Afghanistan, working for the UN, working for the military forces who are trying to stabilize Afghanistan, as well as the Karzai government. Nobody is telling me that the situation is getting better. Indeed, people are saying that it is getting worse and may well lead to utter chaos.
Look, there could be a collapse in Afghanistan. I don't know that for a moment, and the struggle there is big. But I would come back to this thing that if you have the choice between dealing with a regime like the Taliban for 70, digging it in, treating it as if it's just any other regime, treating the vote in Afghanistan at the UN as equivalent to the vote of any democratic power like India, I think you end up in a bad position. I don't think that Afghanistan is anytime soon going to be a thriving economy. I don't think there are very easy answers. There might not be any answers to the problem of the Afghan economy. But that doesn't mean that Afghanistan in 2001 should have been allowed to just continue living in the Dark Ages under a government that imposed the Dark Age philosophy on its people, that had terror training camps where people could be sent around the world to commit acts of terror in other cities, in New York, Washington, and elsewhere. I don't think that was a viable alternative to the situation we have now.
The situation we have now... The same sorts of terror camps are now in Iraq, which is... a direct result of us having gone there.
Look, there were terrorists in Iraq before we went in there. Iraq was the home of international terrorism.
But not Al-Qaeda, you would agree?
No, not Al-Qaeda.
Fine. I want to turn, if I may, to consider, because we've talked a lot about American neoconservatism, American mindsets, but you want to make it relevant to Europe, this neoconservative idea. In Europe, it seems your message is that we're not just fighting enemies without, we're fighting enemies within. Is that
certainly? Yeah.
And who are these enemies within?
All sorts of people. I mean, there are people who I intimated earlier about welfare spending and so on. I mean, there are a lot of people in Europe who have the attitude which is un-American, and so yeah, it's a
which is a bad thing in your to be un-American.
I'll explain why in a second. His attitude towards, for instance, taxation is that. I mean, you don't hear in European elections, you don't hear people saying in American elections that you will relieve people from their tax burden, that you will slash taxes, because really people ought to be able to decide how they spend their own money. You don't really get that. Europe as a continent seems to me to be going the way where we believe that there are very few certainties in life. One of them, without doubt, is that we'll keep on paying more and more taxes, we'll pay more and more in welfare spending. It probably won't do much good, but we'll keep throwing money into it anyway. I think that this is a very hard thing to struggle against. It's very hard to persuade Europeans at the moment that the government is not there to make them happy, that the government cannot make them happy. Now, in America, you don't have a problem making that case. Lots of people make that case. It is very hard to persuade a European of that.
I find what you're saying fascinating, because you want to defend Western values, European values. That is absolutely the core of your belief system. And yet, when we start talking about Europe, you actually seem to despise a lot of what Europe has stood for the last 50 years. Europe has evolved since the Second World War in a very liberal, tolerant sort of way.
It's not to do with liberalism or tolerance. No, of course not. Never said it. This is not to do with liberalism or tolerance. This is liberalism. It is a situation where people have less control of their own money than they ought to have, in my opinion. They have ended up, as I say, as welfare brats across very large swathes of Europe. And as I say, you end up in this very difficult position where people are fixed on the fundamental mistake where they think that the government is there to make them happy or can make them happy. I don't believe it can. I don't think there's anything at all illiberal in believing that people should be freed from paying money to a state which cannot give them what they want.
Well, you've chosen to look at this debate about Europe so far in terms of welfare state. I would like you to address the role of Muslims in Europe, because, just to quote something which I may be misreading, but something you wrote not so long ago, Europe's half-century-long holiday from reality is over, you said. Europe has unsustainable demographic issues which, if unaddressed, will eradicate the continent as we know it in 3 or 4 generations. Yeah. Were you there partly pointing to the demographics that suggest the Muslim population of Europe is on the rise?
Yes, absolutely.
You see that as a fundamental danger to everything Europe stands for?
I think it's a danger when it happens too fast, which is happening, I think, at the moment, and a lot of people agree with this. I think of a country I spend a lot of time in, like Holland, for instance, where there are government statistics that suggests within just over a decade, the majority of people in Holland will be, as it were, non-Dutch. Now, you can say that there's something funny about
they won't
pointing
be
at
non-Dutch, will they? Because
hang on.
they will be Dutch citizens, and they will be the children of Dutch citizens, and they will be as Dutch as any other.
Oh, you want to bet? Just go to Amsterdam or go to one of these cities and say, do you think that when you go into the mosque and you talk about issues which matter a lot to me, like gay rights, like women's rights, and all these things, do you think you will get as much of a hearing there, or do you think you will find it harder to? My suggestion, but the reason why I cite Holland is because in my opinion, very hard fought for rights, very hard fought for liberal rights, like equalities, like basic equalities like gay rights, are under threat, are undoubtedly under threat when you have too fast a population rising in that country that has not had time and will not, under the current demographic figures, have time to adapt to the Dutch way of life. Will Holland look more Dutch in the way we know it in 20 years' time, or will it look more Islamified? I think I know the answer.
In a nutshell, you're saying Europe has too many Muslims.
Well, I think at the moment the Muslims are not integrating fast enough into Europe.
Europe has too many Muslims.
I don't think that
What
they
are
are.
you,
Well, look,
feel free to say it.
Look, it wouldn't matter if there were too many Muslims, if they integrated. But very many of the figures we see show that they are not. In Britain, polls have showed, there was one just last year from Policy Exchange, that showed that 40% of Muslims in Britain, for instance, wanted some elements of Sharia to be incorporated into British law. I think you find yourself in a very difficult position, if I may finish, you find yourself in a very difficult position when a sway of whatever religion or whatever race, and after all this is actually about ideology, we're talking about an ideology in Islam, when people, when a substantial enough percentage of your population honestly believe that they should be ruled by a different rule of law from other people, that is a problem. It's going to be a bigger problem, it is going to be a growing problem.
You run something called the Centre for Social Cohesion. Does it aid social cohesion to essentially say, as you appear to agree with what I posited to you, that Europe, Britain, has too many Muslims? Is that really good for social cohesion, that sort of philosophy?
Look, there are two sides to this. One is what Muslims think and what they do in the West, and I don't have any doubt, and I've expressed it many, many times, that most Muslims are perfectly law-abiding people and so on. But
well,
if you look,
quite frankly, you sound as though you do have doubts. And reading some of the things you've written about terrorism in Islam, you clearly have doubts.
I have doubts about Islam as a philosophy, as an ideology.
But you think Islam essentially, that terrorism is a natural product of Islam?
No, I don't think it's a natural product.
Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so
thank you. It's not a natural product of Islam necessarily, but there seems to me to be no doubt that that Muslim extremists and fundamentalists can find justification in Islamic texts for acts of terror. Now, fortunately, there are many other Muslims who explain to them that they shouldn't be going down that road, you don't have to interpret the text in that way. But if you ask me whether or not there are in Islamic texts justifications for terror, then the answer to that is yes.
You see, when you talk like this, there are Islamic scholars, and I'm going to quote one at you, whom you know well and have debated many times, Tariq Ramadan, who accuse you of sweeping generalizations which tar an entire religion and an entire people in Europe with this brush of security risk, possible terrorism. And it's not fair, and it is deeply damaging to community relations across Europe.
Look, the thing that's deeply damaging to community relations is when people get on buses and blow people up, when they get on trains and blow people up,
and
when they kill,
blow up Muslims, they blow up Christians, atheists, and everybody else.
Because they hate the society. Because they hate the Muslims in society who integrate into part of the society as well. But if you ask me what the problem is, I know what the problem is. The problem is the people who do that. The problem are the people who want to hunt down people who say what they think about other people's ideologies, the people who don't mind killing filmmakers in the middle of the street in Amsterdam. That seems to me to be where the problem lies. Now, you can decide, you can decide that instead of there being a problem, anyone who identifies the issue is the problem. You can mix up the firefighter and the fire. You can mix up the actual problem with the people who are diagnosing and explaining the problem.
But Islam is not monolithic. I'm sure you would agree.
Absolutely.
With that. I'm sure you would look at the initiatives in Turkey, for example, where the state is sponsoring a major reinterpretation of the Hadith, which some say could be as important as the Reformation in Christianity. Islam is evolving, changing, and developing all of the time in Europe.
Sure.
You, on the other hand, have this one monolithic view of how Islam is.
No, I don't. But look, just as you say quite rightly that Turkey attempts to reinterpret the Hadith is going on at the moment. We'll wait and hope that it's successful. It seems to me amazing that you would have to go to a religious text and have to explain or have to take out verses that say some of the things that Hadith say about, for instance, the role of women in society and their worth. But I hope that reformation you described can happen. And I'm not denying that it's possible or that it's going on. There are people working at it. But at the same time, there are places, and I would particularly cite Iran since 1979, there are cases which have shown, and have contradicted the liberal Western view of things, have shown that history can also turn backward. But at the same time, you can get progress, you can have other Muslims who will be arguing more fundamental ways. We'll wait and see who wins. We know that we have to back the reformers and the moderates, but we should not deny there are other people who are doing the opposite.
Almost out of time, but Norman Podhoretz, one of the intellectual founders of neoconservatives in America, says that we are locked in a fourth world war. Is it your contention for Europe that we in Europe are in a fourth world war?
In my opinion, we are in something like the opening stages of it. And there is now time to stop it. There is time by standing alongside those Muslims who are genuine reformers to stop their faith being continually hijacked by the people who are against reform. We know which side we have to be on. It has to be on that side. If we sort this out now, there will not be that war.
Douglas Murray, thanks very much for being on Hardtalk.
Thank you.